Hey, hello. It's lovely to see you again, Diane. We're here for another episode of our Neurodivergent Nook podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about the process of diagnosis. So, things like pros and cons,
Mhm.
um, both for children and for
Yeah.
adults. I'm Helen Neal. As always, haven't changed. I'm a therapist and autistic ADHD myself, and I'm with Diane, and I'll let her introduce herself.
Thank you, Helen. Hi, Diane here, also ADHD, previous teacher and head teacher. I'm currently a foster carer, a tutor, and a coach for neurodivergent teenagers as well.
Wonderful. So we've got both professional and lived experience. So to start out, I guess, start at the beginning. What was it that sort of led you to seek
Mhm.
the diagnosis? Because obviously you're formally diagnosed both.
Yeah. So I was diagnosed 3 years, no, sorry, 4 years ago now with ADHD, and diagnosed just over a year ago with autism. So very late for both. What made me think whether that was a process to go through, um, kind of that personal experience of going through referrals and assessments for some of my own children. Um, that was, kind of, I suppose, the crux in terms of, questioning and wondering where, where that kind of comes from in your family, and, and who else in the family might be neurodivergent. Um, When I was supporting one of my children through their ADHD assessment, um, my other family members made it very clear how they felt, that they thought I also had ADHD. And while that was happening, I was also saying to my husband that I thought he had ADHD. Um, and kind of, yeah, and while that was all happening, family members were also telling me that they thought I had autism, which I did not believe at all, not for any particular reason. But that was something that I was kind of adamant I didn't also have that. Um, but when I got my diagnosis of ADHD, um, and continued to learn more about that and what that means for an adult, I knew that it kind of wasn't the everything. I was processing, that diagnosis, the ADHD one, and processing, kind of, the whole entire of my life, and that kind of, roller coaster that you go on just thinking back to everything. But yeah, kind of there seemed to be a missing bit to the puzzle, which turned out to be my autism diagnosis. So yeah, that's how it kind of happened for me. Yeah, what about
Yeah.
you?
So for me, actually, I was diagnosed late in my 50s, ADHD, and then 18 months later,
Mm.
diagnosed autistic. And it all fell out of my training. Perhaps it fell
Right.
out. It sounds a bit strange. But I'd not really thought of it. It wasn't on my radar. I didn't really
Right.
understand it, didn't know enough about it
Right. Yeah. Okay.
until I did my counselling training,
Yeah.
and then suddenly started to think, oh, hold on,
This
the
is the
reason I can't concentrate and I flip from one task to another,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I'm really struggling to start this assignment,
Yeah.
that
Yeah. That's a big
kind of
one.
thing.
Yeah.
I suddenly thought, oh God, I didn't realize there might be an explanation about cognitive difference
Yeah.
that
Sure.
might explain that, rather
Okay.
than me just labeling myself as lazy or incompetent or just, incapable. And that genuinely is how I felt sometimes, because I just didn't understand that that was a difference.
Difference. Yeah. And just, I assume then you just kind of learned that that was, or told yourself and taught yourself, that's just what I am, and that's just the stuff I'm not good at, rather than.
Yeah, rather than actually sort of thinking, well, there is an explanation for this. I can be a bit more compassionate to myself
Yeah.
when I, you know,
Mm.
forget things, or when I'm getting quite anxious about that deadline, but still,
Yeah.
you know, it's important to me, but that's what's supposed to get you started. And it wasn't until last minute that it would get me
That's it.
started.
Pressure. I can do it now. I've got the pressure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that
Yeah.
urgency kicked in, and
Yeah.
the adrenaline, you know,
Yes.
because we know about that now,
Yeah.
because I understand that about the presentation that, you know, my brain needs. It
Yeah,
needs that
that's it.
urgency, that novelty, you know, that interest,
Yeah.
and it'll get me going. And it was that, I suppose, that drove me
Yeah.
to seek the diagnosis is alongside the supports.
Right. Okay. Okay. And during during that, kind of realization, I suppose, for yourself, did you do what I was doing and also continue to do, just kind of analyzing every family member, an extended family member that you've got?
I think it's only natural to
Yeah.
do that, I
Yeah.
think. And it's difficult, isn't it? Because, you know, when you've, I suppose, been in the dark for nearly 50 years, because you're a similar age to
Yeah.
me, about this sort of type of difference,
Yeah.
you suddenly start thinking, oh, well, actually, where's it come from?
Yeah.
For me,
Mm.
where's it come from?
Mm.
And I looked at my dad, at my mum. My brother has severe mental health challenges, and I looked at, you know, maybe the overshadowing that has been going on for him, because they focus on the fact that he has schizophrenia,
Yeah.
and then they don't really think about the other differences that he
Yeah.
might have
Yeah.
and take that into consideration.
Yeah.
So I think it was a part of the natural process, and my kids too. But that,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know, that I think it's that autistic bit of me that wants to know the answers.
And I completely understand that. I mean, I go around, that person's got ADHD, that person's got autism. If I could, you know, get a pound for every time I got that right, I'd be a millionaire, I think. I think, and I have different friends who have very different opinions, I suppose, and views on whether an assessment and a diagnosis is important, whether it's for them or their child, for example, or whether they think it's not necessarily, and they've got by this far in life, and they don't need to change anything or find out anything more about themselves. And I'm very aware that I sometimes get frustrated by that, because although my journey's been tough in the last few years, it has answered, thousands of questions.
Yeah.
And I can now sit here with my dress and my pink trousers and my beads, being me and not masking. And, if I'd worn this out 5 years ago kind of thing and had my hair like this, I would have been just completely uncomfortable, because I would have been worried about what other people felt about me. And I think that having some of those questions answered, even if you're answering them yourself, is important, but it's not for everybody. And that's the autistic bit of me that I have to try and think that person isn't necessarily seeking the same stuff as I am. But if I look at that from an education perspective, from my career, I still think it is important for a child or a young person to get the right diagnosis. And I really, really do. I know not everybody in education necessarily thinks that way. And, any good school, most of them out there will be supporting a child if they just have that profile, for example, of autism or ADHD or, anxiety or, dyslexia, whatever it might be, even if they can't get that assessment, because of long waiting lists. But we have to be the, advocate for those children. And I think that if that is even just a case of getting them on a waiting list, that might take another, 2, 3, 4 years, depending where you are in the country, then it's important to do that, and especially I think for teenagers that might need that kind of support and guidance, for still years years ahead of them, especially in, going through exams, etc. Then why not give them some more understanding about themselves if we can?
And I guess, you know, we sought our later diagnosis for understanding,
Yeah.
and depending on the support needs,
Yeah.
that diagnosis, it may be super beneficial for it to come earlier for higher support needs. But I do think there's a sort of a misunderstanding sometimes around, you know, the concept of higher support needs
Yeah.
and how those needs might manifest. Just because somebody, so for example, if I look at my brother,
Mm.
you might think that if he was neurodivergent, then you know, he's not got any other co-occurring conditions in
Yeah.
terms of
Yeah.
physical disability or intellectual
Mm.
disability, but his internal world is very, very complex.
Mm.
He's schizophrenic,
Mm.
he struggles with mood disorders, he is potentially PDA,
Yeah.
and it's trying to understand and unpick
Mm.
those needs,
Yeah.
um, can be quite complex, um, if we're just focusing on the need, particularly within the way our system is set up.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, and it's not just the need, it's the support, isn't it? And it's
Mm.
the, kind of the provision, for that
Around
person
it.
around it as well. And like you said, so that they can manage in society, which, whether you have a physical disability or, whether it's an invisible disability like, like ours, um, it's hard, isn't it? It's,
Mm.
it's difficult. And, I haven't quite got round to the point of wearing t-shirts shouting, I've got ADHD and autism yet. Um, but yeah, you kind of just want that little bit of support and understanding, don't you? I think post-diagnosis, because you're going on that journey and yeah, just be nice. And you just kind of want somebody to sort of be supporting you on that journey, I suppose, don't you really?
Absolutely. And I guess you're touching on there one of the
Mm.
reasons why, you know, some people don't pursue a
Yeah.
diagnosis. It's,
Yeah.
you know, and I've seen it in my work, and,
Mm.
I work with diagnosed, undiagnosed,
Yeah.
all
Mm.
children, adults, and sometimes it's that associations with some of
Yeah.
these labels
Yeah.
that can hold people back.
Yeah. Yeah. And for sure I've seen that lots, when supporting parents, in my role as Senko and head and stuff, where you might be, when I worked in early years, might be that person who's saying that for the first time to a parent or a carer. We've noticed X, Y, and Z with your child, and we think potentially or possibly that that they may have this and that, even though you obviously can't diagnose. Um, and, wow, the different responses, reactions that you receive from, a parent or a carer is obviously completely unique and, personal to that parent that you're talking to. Um, and, sometimes it can take years of really kind of subtly supporting that family, but continuing to sow those seeds so that hopefully at some point that parent might say to you, okay, I think we're ready. Let's get that referral done. Yes, we want some help. Yes, we want some support. Yes, we want, and of course they always want what's best for their child. But I think sometimes they could be so terrified and frightened of, what we're kind of about to, um, open. Yeah. Um, and obviously a lot of the time then you are also working with that parent who's potentially neurodivergent themselves. So when you go on that journey with that parent about their child, you are usually doing that as a whole kind of family unit.
Mm.
And what they all learn about each other over that kind of couple of years really can be quite intense and yeah, a privilege to be part of. Um, because you end up quite often in schools, holding those families, kind of emotionally as well. Yeah.
And it is a very emotional journey for
Mm.
everybody.
Mm.
And I suppose that's that that's why it's such a personal thing, is to
yeah,
choose
yeah,
to focus on the child's needs. And I
yeah.
suppose in the UK,
Mm.
the education and healthcare plans for the moment, we don't know what's going
Right.
on with those, are needs based,
Yeah, yeah.
theoretically.
Mm.
But we all know how difficult it can be. And
Yeah,
I'm sure you've worked with many a parent around the fight for getting, and it is a fight
yeah.
a lot of the time, for getting what their children need in
So
this
much.
country.
Yeah, 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 so much, I mean, I look at, EHCPs regularly, um, knowing that, in reality, a school's, not going to be obviously be able to meet every single need. And that parent, seeing that as, well, if it's there, my child has got to have that, and then that's where that potential of relationships then break down between, parent and carer or school. Um, I'm working with, a family at the moment who want their child to have a more kind of, bespoke package at school. And I was, saying that that's probably not likely to happen, not because the school can't, or, that won't or don't want to, but there is such limited, funding, such limited training opportunity, training and funding for training in schools, etc. That, what you're wanting is so bespoke, and, your child is one child in that whole school, that, schools can't manage that. And that's a really hard conversation to have when a parent, quite rightly, only wants the very best for their child,
Yeah, yeah,
Um, and how do we come to make, have that a mutual working, successful relationship, so actually the child benefits, when the school and the parents are, sort of working in harmony. And I can't see that problem going away for a
mm,
little while yet.
yeah. Well, I'm crossing everything for
Mm,
the reforms, but
yeah,
as we all are, we're all
mm,
kind of, I hate to say it, skeptical
yeah,
about what's going to happen.
yeah,
Um, and I guess that leads on to that diagnosis question around the child and what your experiences have been
mm,
in terms of working with younger children and teens around
yeah,
that, you know,
yeah.
identity for them.
Yeah, and again, a variety of kind of responses and reactions that I can, think of with different young people and teenagers. Um, I was working with a teenage girl a while ago, who has a diagnosis of ADHD. And then, at college one day, she said, "Oh, I did an autism test today, and it's come out that I'm very highly likely." And it was, kind of one of those online ones. But, she now wants to pursue that. And then kind of having to share that with the parents who that wasn't on their radar at all. Hold on a second, we're just, still getting over the fact that our child's got ADHD. What, where's this come from? So for that, that particular girl, she was interested and curious to find out more and more about herself. Um, so yeah, that's, kind of one example of one child. I mean, I've got, another one I'm working with who just received an ADHD diagnosis, and they already knew that they had autism, and just really cheesed off, great, great, I got something else kind of
Mm,
response.
yeah.
And that's hard because, what are they saying to themselves? Are they, they're obviously, it sounds like they're seeing that as another negative thing. Um, yeah. And kind of, I think, for some teenagers, there's kind of that little bit of, almost a little bit kind of like learned helplessness. Oh, well, when I've already got, this and I've got that, then, what's the point of doing this? What's the point of trying at school? I'm just in, the low groups or whatever anyway. So I think a lot of it, a lot of the responses I've seen have initially been quite negative for that to that person about themselves.
Mm.
And then, so that's where, I come in as a coach, or, you as a therapist, isn't it? And try and support to change that mindset a little bit, isn't it, really? And make that a more positive experience.
And I guess that's, I suppose, partly you know, particularly with a team maybe,
Yeah.
but I'm also thinking about myself and looking back when
Yeah.
because you kind of have those the difficulties that sometimes ADHD, and I talked about them at the beginning of the conversation, and you think, well, that I'm just rubbish,
Yeah.
you know, and you're not rubbish, you're just different, but that creates that internal voice and that internal critic, and the self-esteem, and it's not, you know, as soon as I got my diagnosis, I didn't suddenly go, yay, I'm aced.
Yeah.
That's not how it works. And I work with a therapist.
Yeah.
And you know, it sounds like you're working with teens in a similar way. It's not, it doesn't suddenly go,
No.
does it?
No.
You
No.
know, and it takes time,
Yeah.
and particularly, you know, I tend to process emotions slower. And, you know, I sometimes go 3 days after it, I've experienced something. Oh, God, yeah. And I'm a therapist. You know, oh, God, yeah. Now, actually, I think about that. That's because I was really sad because X.
Yeah. Yeah.
And now I understand why I was a little bit off.
Yeah.
Then.
Yeah.
So, you know, not all the time, you know, but that
always pick up on it.
it depends how tired I am, what my energy levels are like.
Yeah.
But now I understand that too.
Yeah.
I can be a little bit more forgiving.
Yeah, and like, it's so important, isn't it? When you know we are amazing at being such, you know, critiques of ourselves all of the time. It's lovely, isn't it? We can just go, I'm going to forgive that today, or just forgive the last hour, and just being being kind to yourself. Yeah, definitely.
And you know, I was labelled too sensitive from a really young age because, you know, my dysregulation often appears as crying.
Right,
and I'll cry at lots and lots of different things,
Okay.
like sadness, embarrassment, even anger sometimes,
Yeah.
or shock, you know, lots of different things.
Sure. Okay.
And I guess the diagnosis helped me realise that that was just me.
Yeah, and that's okay to
And
feel
that's
like
okay
that.
to feel like that.
Yeah.
And you know, I say just me, but you know, we're all more than, and I think that's the other thing as well, is to remember that being autistic, ADHD is one part of a usually complex human being.
Yeah.
And there's lots of other bits to me. Some bits are really annoying. I'll admit that. Even to myself, you know, they're really annoying.
Yeah.
But I think that's the breadth and depth of the humanity, isn't it?
It can, absolutely. And it's just, you know, hopefully every human on this earth thinks about themselves and is reflective, isn't it? I just think that, you know, us neurodivergents are good at doing that 24/7 without stopping day and night. Am I this? Am I that? But I think, you know, for any human to grow and evolve, isn't it? It's important that they do challenge their own thoughts and,
Absolutely.
you know, and as you said, forgive, be kind to themselves when they need to as well. Yeah, it's having a balance, isn't it? But I think, you know, and again, this is, you know, very personal to me. I think that's why a diagnosis, if you are neurodivergent and you haven't got one, might just help you at some point in your life. You know, I think there will be an experience or a time when you might go, oh yeah, I'm glad I got that diagnosis. That's helped me to understand why I, you know, responded or whatever to that situation. Yeah, that's what I hope will do that.
And I guess this is something that I talk about quite regularly with other neurodivergent people, is just because you get the diagnosis doesn't mean that you're not a unique, wonderful individual. And I think there's a couple of books that I read recently. Stephen Unwin, which is Beautiful Lives, about his son, Joey, and another one, Diagnosis Human, by Ellie Chappell, about her daughter.
Okay.
And they're both very moving stories, and lived experience about how the value of just human and humanity. And I think sometimes the word diagnosis takes that away.
I agree.
And
Yeah.
and that's maybe why I can kind of understand both sides. So that some people do want to pursue a diagnosis and some people don't.
Yeah.
And it's I suppose it's about honouring that.
Totally, yeah. And I would, completely agree with you and not ever push, I sincerely hope I wouldn't ever push that on somebody. Yeah, maybe that diagnosis word needs to be changed to self-understanding or something.
Some people like identification. And there is Luke Bearden, who's a very eminent autistic scholar, Sheffield Hallam, I think he uses that.
Yeah, and that's, and maybe that is, and maybe that's something we can talk about another podcast, isn't it? That what is kind of that feels right for you, isn't it, to identify who you are,
and I
whether
guess
you, and then again, sorry, interrupting you.
It's all right. I did it.
And I think self-diagnosis or awareness of what if you have a neurodivergence is just as important, isn't it? I
Absolutely.
suppose what I probably should have said there is it doesn't necessarily need the paperwork.
Yes.
I just think it's important to acknowledge
and understand.
Yeah,
And yeah.
I've got, a particular family member who won't even have that conversation, and thinks that, it's impossible that they may have, what I believe is autism. And unfortunately, that's had a massive, massive impact on our relationship, because they see that as a really negative thing about themselves, even though they don't see it as a negative thing to family members. So I think that's self-understanding and, like you said, that self-identification. Yeah, really important.
Yeah. And I do I think that there's an element here where we're all wired to explore ourselves. And the way that being autistic, ADHD, mental illnesses, mental difference, it's all couched within there's something wrong, you're a bit broken because of the medical model.
Yeah.
And I think that feeds into that kind of negativity potentially about that word, diagnosis.
Completely.
And that's perhaps why we are thinking of it like that. And the going back to that point about the diversity of humanity, there are so many different ways that we can be, that's including physical disabilities and differences. And I think that, the way we've, I suppose, focused on that medical model without really thinking about how society disables people that are in a wheelchair or that can't see, and the invisible disabilities as well. And perhaps we need to take a step back and really think about that too. So it's not just diagnosis around being autistic, it's a wider question as well.
I think just taking time, isn't it? Taking time in the day to think about yourself or your friend or your family member that, may have whatever need that they've got. And just raising awareness, isn't it? This is so important. It really is.
Absolutely. So I think that kind of brings us round to the end of the podcast. Thank you so much, as always. And thank you to our listeners for being here. We'll obviously be back again next week. Every Tuesday we come out. So I hope you've enjoyed this, and let us know if there's any topics you want us to cover. And feedback generally as well.
We're really keen to have feedback now. We kind of got into the groove of doing this each week. We'd really appreciate that.
Absolutely. So thank you so much for turning up, and we hope to see you again soon. Take care, everyone. Bye bye.